Hello, this is the 10th webinar of the Scottish Civil Society Data Partnership project. I think maybe a couple of people following us live today. We've just been a few minutes delayed getting started. Another technical hitch. We've had a few of those lately, but hopefully everything's set up now, well. So I'm Paul Lambert, broadcasting from Stirling University in this webinar alongside Alasdair Rutherford, both of us members of staff in the Civil Society Data Partnership project in Scotland, a project that's interested in exploring data opportunities for research in third sector organisations. In today's webinar, the last in our series of 10 webinars actually, we've picked on a theme which is about supporting people doing research, and in particular helping other people, helping our colleagues typically make progress with research data resources related to civil society organizations. So one of the origins of this is the observation sometimes that if you are yourself engaged in research as an activity, you often end up getting almost dragged in to helping other people work with their data, giving advice on techniques of analysis and methods of analysis over and above your own work. So we thought it would be helpful to reflect on the dual processes of finding out and getting help about how to do research, but also good practice and ideas in helping other people do research. So today we've got 4 presentations lined up. They're all about 15-20 minutes long. We're going to play them one after the other, and in between we'll be looking out for questions and comments, and we'll respond to anything that comes in. The first of the broadcasts is actually recorded by me. It's called Good and Bad Habits in Supporting Your Colleagues in Data Analysis. And it's just about some principles of organizing and thinking about how we go about advising people and looking for resources in the research process. So we'll switch over to that broadcast just now.
Okay, so in this recording, we're reflecting on the common enough scenario in research activities where somebody involved in working with data and undertaking research may well find themselves also either working collaboratively with other people or perhaps actually helping them out or supporting them in some way with their data resources. So many of us in different roles are researchers. We're working with some sort of empirical data. Academic researchers like myself, we're looking at assessing and evaluating academic theories or claims about society. Researchers typically in third sector organizations looking at finding out evidence about how their the services in their organization perhaps are working, or how they're viewed by other people. Classically, as what we may say research involves is the analysis of data and communicating the results of analysis to other people. In the Scottish Civil Society Data Partnership program, we've spent lots of time in different webinars and workshops talking about data analysis possibilities. So in general, as researchers, we're doing data analysis, we're doing research through the data analysis, we're communicating the results of the analysis to other people. But I would argue that there's two other common and important components to many researchers' activities. One of these is the separate activity of data management, which often gets forgotten about as a part of the research process. And by data management here, I mean essentially the preparation and organization of data, cleaning data, for example. This is a big part of the workload of any individual analyst. And actually in the CSDP program, we've tried to make mention of data management activities in a number of previous materials. It's worth flagging because whether you're working individually or collaboratively with others or helping other people, the point would be that advice or support on data management is often as big as, if not a bigger part of the work involved in dealing with research data and thinking about research resources. And the fifth element, the other thing about most research roles, is that a lot of us were also essentially consultants for other people as well, ad hoc consultants to our colleagues on both data management and data analysis. So people come and ask us questions about how to process data, how to undertake analysis in different ways. We're often involved in collaborative research activities, part of a team, several different people working on it. We may be in a situation where we're making a start on a project and we're planning to hand it over to somebody else at a later stage. So the angle of this particular recording is this situation when we are, whether we meant to be or not, when we've become consultants for other people, advisors for other people about research. What things should we be thinking about or looking out for? So lots of people in research roles find themselves not just undertaking the research, but also being asked for other people, by other people, what they should do, how it should be done. And this is quite a tricky thing because many of us didn't particularly plan on this in advance. My observation in research project experience is most commonly some of the things we tend to do without giving it too much thought would be to give advice to other people simply, which is, this is how I would have approached the research challenge. Somebody's asking us how to analyze data. Well, this is what I would have done. This is the software I would have used. You should do it like this, which is potentially fine in itself, but obviously at a risk of narrowing the range of advice or recommendations. Very often in this scenario, the people asking advice probably think we know a lot more about a particular topic than we necessarily do. The nature of undertaking empirical research, when you don't know about a particular approach, technique, or analysis, or whatever, it can seem like the other people, the people that do know, are very special, very super intelligent types that have far greater expertise than us. One of the consequences typically is when people ask for advice, they often take it fairly uncritically. And another but different point about sort of problems in addressing queries and advice requests from other people. In many fields of empirical data research, the problems are really more about data management than data analysis. It's perhaps easier to give advice on data analysis, for example, what sort of statistics should be used, because that path is more fully trodden. But data management, the processing and organization of data, is a thing that trips more people up more of the time. One last point I would make about difficulties in taking in queries or offering support to other people, is that in truth, most of the time, the best advice we could give would probably be to refer people onwards to other published resources. And these might be online resources. On screen, I've got the IDI RE web pages at UCLA, which have really excellent advice on statistical analysis methods in a number of software. But of course, in the human interaction involved in asking for advice and support, it tends to be that neither us nor the person asking the questions particularly wants that. It's not necessarily the first thing we think to do. More often, people want a certain level of direct advice, hand-holding almost. So I'm now going to make a few comments about things I would suggest, I would argue, are good and bad habits when advising other people about the empirical data analysis process. The 2 points I would start with are somewhat interrelated, and they're about what I would often call low-level operational details. So when we talk in empirical research about high-level and low-level information, high-level information would be broad brush summary statements, overviews, outlines. Low-level information would be very fine-grained details telling us precisely about how things work and how they're done. Low-level operational detail would be very fine-grained details about the exact processing of the data, how, for example, if it was statistical data, how variables were recoded and what statistical technique exactly was used to produce the summary statistic and so forth. And I would say that we can only really give good advice to people if we do provide low-level operational details about activities of both data management and data analysis as well for the empirical analysis of data. And related to that, doing things that encourage transparency and replicability in the advice and suggestions that we're giving. So transparency, making it easy for people to see exactly what's going on with the data analysis, the data processing, replicability, giving advice and details that are sufficiently consistent that we could redo the analysis again at a later time and get to the same results. Just an example, the graph on the right on the screen, it's just something I've used a couple of times in the CSDP webinar series. It's nothing more than reporting some average levels of volunteering, the proportion of people that regularly volunteer, rather, by education and gender. All of the work really of this graph was about operational organization of the data. It was really about recoding the variables, defining the measures. The actual production of the graph and the statistical calculations are pretty trivial by comparison to the pre-processing and cleaning of the data as a preparatory activity. So if I was trying to advise somebody else how to produce that graph or something very similar to it, the thing that would count would be the advice on the pre-processing and the preparation, the cleaning of the data. Another thing that has been mentioned before in the webinar series is the benefit of thinking in terms of a workflow of research activities when working with data resources. So the workflow model essentially would be to try and build up a coherent story of the research process from start to finish, from the original access of the source data, whether it's statistical data, qualitative data, whatever, through its operational organization and pre-processing to the final analysis. And any sort of advice to other people about how to go about working with empirical data, to try and encourage them to think of the whole workflow, not just focus on one particular element of the activity, but to document and record the entire workflow, is more likely to be useful in the longer term. And another thing that again has been mentioned several times in the CSDP programs, it's not universal, but one of the things that's very often relevant to giving low-level details effectively and encouraging transparency and replicability of results is using some sort of syntactical command file style of processing data when that's relevant. So when it's statistical data, then we'll be using some sort of software to generate the statistical results, most software for generating statistical results has a command file option where we can produce the results and the graphs through text-based commands, which we can keep a record of, rather than point-and-click interfaces and so forth. And if we do the former, if we use command files, this is a much more coherent way to record what we've done. But in the context of being part of a collaborative team or advising other people what to do, this is a great way to be able to share information at the low-level operational detail. And three other things that I would flag as good advice when advising other people in undertaking research or being part of a collaborative team. And I'm starting with a quote from Steven Seagal, the actor who appears in numerous movies as essentially an infallible man. He's big and tall, indestructible. Everything he says is true. So the quote that he makes in his movie is bound to be true. I do think it's actually a good instantiation of an important point when advising people about empirical data. The quote, "I ain't gonna baby you, man. If I baby you, you'll never learn." The context is giving somebody advice on, it's actually about defusing bombs, and it's a terrible action movie. The context is, if you take over and do everything for somebody else, they don't learn effectively. You really have to give people the foundations to know how to move forward, but let them learn and develop and work out for themselves. In a more formal education research orientation, we'd say this is essentially a cognitive approach to learning. We're letting the other people work it out for themselves as a way to fully understand the process. Essentially, we're forcing them to do it for themselves, learn by doing, rather than simply by instruction. But it's not without a view on what the appropriate way to do things is. So I've said a didactic oversight, which essentially means we would say in advance what should be done. In the survey data analysis context, for example, we'd say it's important that you recode your data appropriately. So we have the input that says it should be like this and not like that. But the effective way to get other people to understand and learn that productively is to then say, right, you go and recode it, you do it, not to do the recoding for them. And then doing empirical research, more and more tools of analysis are available. In social statistics, for example, more and more statistical methodologies are becoming available. And so part of the job of supporting people in doing empirical research, giving them advice, whether it's about statistical analysis, qualitative research work, or whatever, is fostering engagement with ongoing resources and information about training, about things that are out there. The image on screen is the National Centre for Research Methods, a UK educational academic project. But what they do is lots of short courses, online training resources. Part of the process of advising people about research methods, I would say, would be pointing them onwards to other resources that can further develop their knowledge and understanding. And then there's all sorts of, the other point is that there's all sorts of data analysis opportunities, data analysis techniques. Actually, different sorts of analytical techniques tend traditionally to be used more often and less often in different disciplinary areas. So social science, academic disciplines tend to approach things differently depending on the field. The methods that somebody might use in, say, psychology would be quite different to the methods that somebody would use in sociology, for example. And of course, this influences our capacity to give advice about methods of analysis, because depending on our own disciplinary orientation, our original training, we'll have a different view and an idea about techniques of analysis. So the other and more challenging feature of being an advisor to other people about research methodology is the attempt to keep an open mind to the wide range of methods and techniques and approaches that are out there. So these are some suggestions of good things to do if you're working collaboratively or helping other people. What about some of the bad things you could do? One of the impulses we have when supporting other people is to take over from them. Oh, just step aside, I'll sort it out for you. Certainly my own research experience, this is really not a great way to work collaboratively or to help other people in their understanding. As soon as you grab the keyboard from somebody else and start doing their analysis for them, they switch off, or they're less likely to take it in and learn the skills themselves. Ideally, what we do is keep our hands off the keyboard, tell other people what they should be doing in general terms, but push them to sort it out and do it for themselves. The role of wizardry, comfort, and awe in advising other people. What on earth have I got in mind here? In research methods in general, because there are a lot of specialist technical things going on in whatever methods we're using, it can appear wizardry sometimes to other people that are not aware of how the outputs were produced. How did that fancy graph get generated? It looks like it was just magical. Again, when supporting other people, sometimes it's a little bit tempting to show off and produce fancy things and hide the details from them in a certain way because it's a little bit more impressive. And some people even want this comfort and awe. When being advised, when learning about other things, one of the easier things to do is settle for comfort and awe. Just sit back, watch them do clever things and be impressed. Don't push yourself to learn how to do them yourselves. So when we're advising other people, it's desirable not to show off, but to teach people the fine-grained details. Show them exactly how things were produced when we reasonably can. And acquiescing to deference. This is my point earlier about people often thinking, when people ask other people for advice, they often believe the person they're asking knows more than they really do. And sometimes it's quite easy for us in that situation to go along with that, to acquiesce. Ideally, we should be trying to move away from that and try and narrow the distance between ourselves and the person we're giving support to. Again, providing the low-level details, the operational guidance, the practical details is generally a step in the right direction to avoid this social pattern. A couple of other things that we often do but are not ideal perhaps in supporting other people with research. The file dump approach to collaborative working or passing on a project to somebody else or just getting somebody else to take something forward. For one thing, that it raises security issues with data files. You're generating duplicate copies of files. You no longer necessarily have a clear record of what everything is. It also raises issues of documentation and version control, so there may become multiple versions of the same data sets floating around when we work in this way. It's also just confusing to other people to dump a large quantity of complicated files upon them. In general, better practice in empirical research data processing and data preparation and analysis is to be succinct with data resources and files, have well-organized file structure on our own machines, and we only give people that we're working with a small number of files and relevant metadata and background information and documentation. The other common challenge in empirical research activities is we often advise people to do something that they don't necessarily have the technological facilities or resources to allow them to do that. So classically, statistical analysis and software, in the CSDP program, we say things like you should use Stata because we think that's a good package for statistical analysis. But unless you're at a university, there's a very good chance you won't have access to Stata anyway. So obviously, advising other people, thinking about whether or not they are actually in a situation where they have access to the appropriate resources to follow the the advice is a key consideration. And of course, on screen, I'm just taking another opportunity to flag at the CSDB project via thinkdata.org.uk. We are trying to provide facilities to allow people easy access to university systems in order that they can have the resources, the software resources, and access to, for example, library resources as are relevant to their research. If people that are engaged in research in third sector organisations, so do consider that as one way around this. So I've been commenting on aspects of supporting and advising our colleagues in data analysis, and I've picked up some things from experience of research engagement that could be thought of as good and bad habits in working with data. I've stressed the importance of thinking about data management as well as data analysis, and actually that is the inquiries that people have are more often about data management than they are about data analysis. Also, the inquiries that people have are very often better addressed by detailed operational guidance. We need to give people low-level operational details in most cases. How exactly do they recode a variable, or how precisely is the organisation and the coding of some interview transcripts achieved? I've also suggested it's generally better if we can draw upon other existing resources rather than simply tell people individually in a face-to-face context what the best advice is. And sometimes we accidentally do the wrong thing when helping colleagues or trying to help colleagues in their research process. There are some bad habits that we sometimes have which don't necessarily take our colleagues forward in making good use of data.
Okay, so that was a couple of reflections on the aspects of helping other people work with research data, a common element of many of our own roles as researchers, working with other people and collaborating. Whilst we're broadcasting, we're looking out for any questions, comments on topics or things raised in sessions through the YouTube channel. There's a chat screen where people that are participating live, you can post questions, and if anything comes in, we can comment on it, reflect on it here. Nothing just yet, but so we'll move on to the next of the recorded presentations. The next presentation is by our colleague Orian Brook, also in the CSDP project at University of Stirling, and it's reflecting on challenges that people face when working with data in the third sector in collaboration with other people or just individually as well. In part, Orian's going to be reporting some results of a little survey that we did just in the last few days on people's experiences and challenges in this area, but also commenting more generally on the issues. So Orian's presentation goes on for about 15 minutes, and after that we've got 2 more presentations lined up subsequently.
Hi, this is Orian Brook, and I'm going to be talking to you in today's webinar about how we can overcome some of the common challenges in analysing third sector data. So what are the common challenges? We had an idea, and then we thought, well, why don't we just ask people? So we ran a quick survey. It was open just for a few days last week. We only got 35 responses. So as I say in the disclaimer, we're not claiming that this has any representativeness or particular statistical rigor, but just a quick straw poll to see what people said. In terms of who replied to the survey, we had 86% of the respondents who were in paid work for the third sector, and 33% were volunteers. Obviously, there were people there who were doing more than one of those things. 52% of the people who replied were generating or had access to internal databases for analysis. There were a few in addition who were doing research but not from their own databases. 72% were female and 71% were graduates, but 50% were humanities or social sciences graduates, and 21% were science, technology, engineering and medicine graduates. So there would be a mixture of people, some with more advanced mathematical and statistical skills maybe, and some not so much. 80% of them were working full-time and 14% part-time, and again 33% were volunteering. Again, people could be doing more than one of those things. So that's a picture of the respondents that these the results I'm going to be talking about are based on, although of course I think and I hope that what they said applied to many others of you out there. In many respects, people were quite confident about some of the regular tasks they're doing with data. So 88% were very confident about filling in databases, and the same number were confident that they would analyse a database that they had for research purposes. People were using the common tools like Excel and Access quite a lot, particularly Excel, Access being the Microsoft's standard database software. There were very few using any specialist statistical software like Stata or SPSS. For 59%, there was also no obstacle in any lack of a expectation that it would actually be useful in terms of using their own data for research. So all of these are very positive. Some of the obstacles that people did mention were, for example, organisational. There was a lack of time was a major obstacle for 55% of respondents, and I'm sure that that would be mentioned by many people in a broader survey. Of course, this, as well as workforce, this is about priorities. And in a series of workshops that were run by the Scottish Civil Society Data Partnership team in 2013, it's certainly something that came up was the importance of leadership, and in particular a survey of the Scottish third sector use of business critical data, which characterised organisations according to how advanced they were in using business critical data for research purposes. Those who were making a particularly good use of the data, the people in positions of leadership who were convinced of the importance of using data for research was absolutely critical in terms of that being taken up by the organisation. So in truth, it's going to be very difficult if you don't have people in positions of leadership who prioritise data analysis or research. It's going to be very difficult for that to become a priority. There were also something, and this is something that we've not particularly covered within the webinars. It's obviously something that is crucial within academic research, but it tends to be, it's not part of the, it's part of the pre-research process in terms of getting your research approved, but is concerned about data protection and legal and ethical issues about sharing data. There was a great deal of uncertainty expressed in a variety of questions about how best to share data, about when you could share data, about who you could share it with. And it's also something that was mentioned in the comments, and particularly about how ensuring that where the original organisation was collecting data, how if that data was going to be shared to ensure that the value of that data came back to the original organisation, and that it wasn't somehow taken away and just had somebody else just benefited from it. So the UK Data Archive, which is a major repository of data primarily for the academic sector, but also available to non-academics. They publish many extremely valuable guidance documents, including on data protection, to which there's a link there, of a number of documents for different aspects of data protection there. If you have highly sensitive data where it's going to be extremely difficult for it ever to be shared with anyone, you should consider contacting the Administrative Data Research Centre. They are experts in linking highly confidential data sets, for example, benefits data and the school pupil role, or health data with benefits data, for example, where no individual would have permission to see any of the personal details of somebody's health file or somebody's educational record, but researchers can link the data in such a way that the person conducting the research gets to see the results of the analysis, but they never get to see either data set or the confidential details of either data set, and they have safe rooms where the data can't be taken out until it's been inspected, and so on. So they are experts in analysis and sharing of highly sensitive data. In general, obviously, concerns about respecting data protection legislation and also ethics are very important, but they don't need to prevent collaborations. And there's a couple of examples I was just going to talk about. One is called FORT, which covers a number of schemes run by a company now called Advice Infrastructure in collaboration with Fife Council, which cover basically making referrals between statutory and voluntary organisations, for example, within housing. So statutory housing organisations can make referrals to non-statutory housing associations, but also, for example, for drug addicts or for children's services, where there's highly confidential data there. The company supplying the software and running the systems has passed extremely rigorous NHS ethical and legal approval in the way that they run their systems, they share their data, and it's that certainly the people I've spoken to who've been involved in the scheme have been extremely excited about the benefits of them being able to share this data. Also, another project that I know something about is arts organisations in Scotland who've shared their box office data, not shared individual customer details and never done any marketing with the data, but it's just about looking at the geography of where audiences come from, how they behave, how far they travel, when they book their tickets, what's the demographic profile of the areas that people live in, and so on. And they're able then to share that data, to merge that data in such a way that each individual organisation gets to look at analyses of their data, and they also get to see a benchmark for across Scotland, what audiences in Scotland for different types of events look like, how they behave, what their profile is, and so on. And that's very much done on a give and gain basis, so that each organisation knows what they're getting, an analysis of their data and a comparison of their data to the benchmark. And that's what they're gaining by giving up their data. Obviously, in that case, it's also covered by legal frameworks and protection of the data confidentiality and so on. So they're quite large-scale projects are possible and can have very great benefits where they're undertaken, but they do take some investment in time and in thinking to make them happen. Another obstacle that came up was access to data. A major obstacle for 29% of the respondents. Now, webinar 1 in particular, and also webinar 5, does have some information about sources of survey data, of administrative data, and so on, where you don't have that data collected yourself. There's also some information in the blog post and in the resources section of the website, and Paul will talk a bit more about this in the next section of this webinar, so do stay online. There were also issues about clean data, about where there was missing data, where there were miscodings and so on. With only 32% were very confident about cleaning their own data. It was a major obstacle for 33% of respondents, and 68% admitted that their data would need a fair bit of work if it was going to be shared with anyone. There were also comments about the inconsistency of questions, how they were asked and how they were coded. Now, webinars 3 and 7 do cover some aspects of data management. So do go back and have a look at those at the same link as the one posted above. But my other main message on this issue is don't let it stop you. It is an issue for all researchers, whether you're working with your own data that you yourself collected and didn't necessarily document at the time, somebody else's data within your organisation, to government surveys, academic surveys, and so on. Even where all the data in the UK Data Archive, for example, is very well documented. But you do need to read the documentation to find out how it's been coded and where sometimes the questions have changed, sometimes the coding has changed. Don't get hung up on it in terms of if questions have changed slightly. Look at the results, compare them, see whether it makes sense to you that in terms of the overall long-term trends and so on. And do check unlikely results to check that you haven't misunderstood the coding or that the coding hasn't changed. There is a famous example with the World Values Survey where I can't remember, one of the questions was in one country, they coded yes and no the other way around to all the other countries. So if you're using the World Values Survey, it's obviously very important that you pick that up before you publish any results. So yes, and the other answer is, of course, make sure that you document your own data. Another obstacle was expertise. People felt they had a lack of knowledge of how to analyse both quantitative and qualitative data. Not a major obstacle for that many people, but a minor obstacle for very many. People felt they had a lack of access to an expert where they could consult if they came up with an issue that they just didn't understand, couldn't get to grips with. And also people had a lack of access to the software. Now, there's quite a lot of coverage of this in previous webinars. Webinar 2 in particular, and 5, 6, and 7 too, have quite accessible coverage of various analytical techniques you can do with no great expertise and only access to Excel and a website. Webinar 9 covers analysing qualitative data, again, some with Excel, some we also talk you through some more advanced software. And then 4 and 8 cover more advanced topics of statistical software and statistical analysis, respectively. So there's quite a lot there that you can look at. Paul is also going to cover a bit more in his next talk. You should also consider perhaps taking a course. You don't have to take a whole master's degree. You could take a single module. That would give you access to not only the training that you'd receive within the course itself, but also, of course, university licenses, the library, all the textbooks, the journals, and access to individuals to discuss your research with. So that's well worth considering. I know that for this year, the University of Stirling, through the Civil Society Data Partnership, has had bursaries for a few people to undertake, working within the third sector, to undertake master's degrees in social science research methods. And I don't know what the future of that scheme will be, but we are setting up a scheme whereby people working within the third sector can become associates of the university. So again, having access to all those sorts of resources, data, individuals, and so on. So I do hope that you'll keep an eye on the thinkdata.org.uk website. Thank you very much. Hi, this is Orian Brook, and I'm going to be talking to you in today's webinar.
Okay, so some inputs there from Orian on things that we've heard from people are sometimes obstacles or challenges in doing research with data resources about the third sector. If you disagree with any of the points, let us know. If we've got something wrong or misunderstand some of the things that are holding people back or are challenges for people. It's just a short survey, and most of Orian's presentation was based on quite a small data sample, and we're very interested in the project to hear from people about their efforts in working in this area. We'll move on then to the next recording, which is back to me actually, again for about 20 minutes, and again on the theme of making progress in doing research and using resources to get guidance on different aspects of the research process. What I'm doing in my presentation, very unambitiously, I'm just trying to highlight everything that's on the internet that's useful or potentially helpful to doing research. Obviously a very wide remit, but I'm picking out on some particular aspects of the tasks of doing research with databases in the context of research on the third sector in Scotland, highlighting a few types of data of online resource and highlighting some individual specific sites that we think are helpful to make use of. So this presentation about 20 minutes, and then one more lined up after that about the same length.
Okay, hello. So in the Scottish Civil Society Data Partnership programme, we've quite often mentioned that if you're interested in doing research with data, using methods of analysis from social research, social statistics methods, for example, or qualitative data, we've often suggested that there's lots of materials available online that could help you with this process. And in this recording, we thought it was about time we maybe followed that up with a little bit of substance, highlight to you some examples of what we think are useful online sources for support and advice on research data analysis in one way or another. And so what we thought it would be useful to do would be to highlight some different categories of information resource that's available online and some selected links that we think it's worth taking a look at sometime. So I've listed a number of different things about the process of doing research and data analysis. And in each case, I'm going to say something about online resources relevant to them. And at the top of my list, I've put guides on statistics specifically. If you're interested in using numerical databases for research, statistical methods, well, there's all sorts of things about statistics where information is made available through different online sources. There are some sites that deliberately set out and attempt to be detailed guides on particular statistical methods or a range of different statistical methods, and their main purpose is the provision of information on the tools themselves. There are more generic guides to statistics, such as glossaries. And it's worth noting as well that there are organisations and associations, most of them academic, but not automatically, that have as a priority the use of statistics, social statistics or generic statistical data. And amongst their materials are often introductory level guides or information on statistical methods. On screen, I'm filling out some suggestions of some things that it can be worth looking at. And for the URLs, I should mention, by the way, probably the easiest thing to do to follow up on these links is to download the copy of the slides from the CSDP website rather than try and copy and paste from this webinar broadcast. But I've highlighted some examples of textbooks, short courses, detailed guides on particular examples of statistical methods, a link to a couple of glossaries that are in different contexts are quite handy, a link to some organizations that provide statistical information resources. If we just look at one of those for illustrative purposes, Statistics Glossary, here I'm looking at a website called StatTrek, Teach Yourself Statistics. It's a resource with lots of different things about statistics in general. Amongst other things, it includes a glossary resource under the help site. They call it the Statistics and Probability Dictionary. It's actually with a drop-down menu if there's a particular thing that you're interested in finding out about. You can go through the drop-down menu. If we have a look at correlation, we get a definition of what correlations are, the meaning and contribution of correlation statistics, also a little bit of algebra, giving us some illustrations. Another prominent aspect of working with research data is the activities of data management, the organisation and preparation of data for research purposes. I would say there's probably less readily available online material on specifically data management than there is on data analysis in the form of statistical analysis or other sorts of activities, but there are some relevant materials. There's actually quite a lot of guides on storing and preparing data, such as for distribution. So for example, in the academic sector, academic data archives, which try to collate together research data and make it available to other people for secondary use, they publish their own instructions and guides on undertaking data management, and those can be quite handy ways of finding out information about good practice in dealing with data. Some data management activities are more specifically about processing statistical databases, cleaning data, sorting it out to suit analysis. And one aspect of data management where there are some relevant online resources is about specific measures and variables that we might use in a database. For generic guidance on storing data, the UK Data Service provides information for people archiving social science studies in the UK. Other similar guides in other different contexts, University of Cambridge have a guide. ICPSR is an American website. Have a look at the ICPR guide to data preparation, for example. A lot of background information. ICPSR are a resource that provides a number of things about data resources for social science research, but in their guide to data preparation and archiving, they've got some statements about good practice and recommended steps in preparing data, organizing data for distribution to other people. Some materials on data management in terms of organizing statistical databases are specifically associated with software, which we're about to mention as a next category of online resource. The DAMES project was actually based at the University of Stirling a few years ago, and is one example where there are some materials on those pages which give instructions and advice about recoding variables, linking data sets, common tasks of data management. And in an earlier webinar, actually, we reflected on measures and variables, standard measures and variables, for example, government publications giving recommendations on ways of measuring education, occupation, things like that. So a different category of things that are useful for social research methods that's worth drawing your attention to are guides related to using software. So in many aspects of research data analysis, we're making use of software, and it just so happens that many different software providers give background information on how to use their software effectively, but that background information is obviously useful for working with the specific software, but it quite often has more generic stuff as well that's helpful on research data analysis in general. So actually quite often academics using an academic statistical analysis software tool will actually find out about methods of statistical analysis through software guides. The weight of software materials are probably associated with the analysis of data, and mainly the guidance materials will be about statistical analysis approaches, but there are exceptions. Qualitative research software, Surrey University have some guidance on different software facilities for working with qualitative rather than with quantitative or numeric data, for instance. And there are a few things to do with data management with software. If we have a look at one illustration of software-oriented research resources, I've picked out the IDRE information resources at UCLA, very high quality, widely used and popular research methods resources, but they're organized primarily, not exclusively, but primarily in terms of individual software packages. So if we were to click on any one of the software resources, we find some links to guidance, in-depth guidance on using, in this case, Stata for undertaking analysis, doing things with data. A different category of information provision related to data analysis and social research are associated with people who provide data itself. Quite often people producing and distributing data for researchers also provide a lot of guidance and background information. It's useful to distinguish macrodata and microdata resources when we're thinking about data providers. So macrodata refers generally to aggregate statistics in the social science context, summary statistics calculated for analytical purposes and then made available to other people. So if you go to things like the ONS website, Office for National Statistics in the UK, you'll find information about summary statistics and some background metadata and what's involved in them. Microdata, typically when we've got individual level data about perhaps people or units of interest, families, households, whatever it is. Typically social surveys, data providers providing access to social surveys, but certainly in the case of the UK Data Service, an integrated provision both of social survey microdata, but also qualitative study microdata as well is available. And the point about all these microdata providers is when they make data sets themselves available for research reuse, they also supply documentation and guidance materials in addition. Just a quick look at the front page of the UK Data Service. The main contribution of the UK's data service is probably about helping people find and retrieve data, download a social survey, but you'll see that they're full of links to other materials as well that can help people working with data too. So these data providers sites don't only give data, but they also give information about the analysis of data as well. That's the point there. Training providers too. So in the domain of social research methods and data analysis approaches, there are people that specifically provide short courses, training provisions, online training. So a few of these training providers are deliberately online in the sense that they're online courses. Many others of them are providing more traditional training mechanisms, but they include obviously web pages and online guidance, which in turn can lead to further information resources about methods. So an example of an online training course, the Research Methods Knowledge Base, designed for consumption through web pages. National Centre for Research Methods in the UK is a training provider which they organise workshops, seminars, all sorts of activities, but they include online learning resources amongst their remit and activities. I've also flagged training the trainers as an expression often used in academic social research activities. So this is about helping people be good educators on research methods in itself. The Q-STEP initiative is one example of that sort of activity where they're trying to provide facilities that help make people who are involved in teaching about social statistics more effective in achieving that and more effective as trainers. It is worth spending some time looking around the National Centre for Research Methods website specifically. So this is a UK academic organisation with a remit to promote skills and innovation and research methodology in social research methodology. Obviously academic, but many of the things they're engaged with apply out with academic research sectors. Certainly people in third sector organisations have access to the resources and are encouraged to come along to NCRM activities in general. Another category of online resources relevant to data analysis are research tools that are put online. So we have mentioned a few of these before in this CSDP series. Online survey providers, SurveyMonkey is a famous example, but there are many others. But specific things to be done in research that suit online provision or websites. Online surveys are well known. I've highlighted Quick Surveys and Bristol Online Surveys as two that it's worth having a look at if you hadn't thought about them before. Online statistical analysis. There are some facilities for the analysis of data through online tools. Actually, many of the online survey providers include statistical analysis functionality with them, but there are other things as well. So SDA, for example, is an academic innovation project looking at providing statistical analysis through online interfaces. And another category that may be relevant if you're ever in the process of designing a research study, online power calculators. Power calculators are about making an assessment of the number of cases that a study might need in order to have significant statistical results. If we look at the first of those, the powerandsamplesize.com website, links to go straight through to a number of different calculators that are made available to anybody that wants to use them. You just tap in a few numbers about the nature of the project you're doing, and you can work out minimum required sample sizes, for example. Another good way to find online materials, useful online materials about research methods, is to follow up on individual academics in one way or another. So there's all sorts of things out there. I've picked out a few selected examples, but there's hundreds of different links I could have indicated. A few different categories of academics outputs that it's worth being aware of. Many academic books, published books, have companion websites, and those websites are often full of useful downloadable materials about research methods. Also, many academics publish working papers or journal articles directly on their webpage, open access journal articles and other papers. And many academic working papers are often about aspects of research methodology. Then academics have their web pages in themselves where they stick up stuff about their work, downloadable materials. Particularly if you know of an individual academic working in the field that you're interested in, it's well worth exploring their own individual outputs, their web pages and their working papers and so forth. Just as an illustration of the sort of thing that we'd often see, no particular strong reason for picking out Nigel Gilbert, except that he's worked for many years in social research methodology, currently leading projects on a particular advanced example of social research methodology, namely social simulation. If you go through to his website, and it's linked into his research center, but there's links to publications, papers, downloadable papers, training courses, materials, other resources that they put up, various things that are available from this website. So once you know the person or you know the link, you can follow up on that. Web 2.0, well, perhaps an old-fashioned phrase now, but the gradual innovation in internet publication when we have more interactive online materials. So not just one person publishing and other people reading, but a more opportunities for people to individually contribute or develop websites. There's lots of things of that character that are relevant to social research methodologies. There's still lots of email lists that are archived online, and you can search through email lists for help and queries, see if somebody's asked a similar question to what you're struggling with, or send a question to an email list. And wikis are sort of more modern versions of that, where people post materials online in a semi-moderated way. Quite a lot of individual academics or people engaged in research producing blogs about their activities that are useful things to read, to have a look at. I've labeled as multidimensional a number of sites which bring together lots of different interactive as well as more traditional research methods materials. If you look at Method Space as an example, this is actually associated with the Sage publishers who produce a publishing house which produce lots of academic books on research methods, but lots of resources on interactive resources on the Method Space site, blogs and videos. Blogs, for example, on big data and the Data Dive initiative, for example, run by DataKind. But then one risk with websites, of course, there's rubbish on the web as well as good stuff. We have to be a little bit careful about the quality of materials. It's always possible to stumble across a website that takes you in the wrong direction. The link I've put up on the slides here is an example of somebody saying something wrong about regression models, some commonly misunderstood issues about regression. Somebody's posted a post online giving the wrong advice, but then there's another site that picks up on that and comments on it critically. But it is possible to get bad advice through online materials, and it's difficult to know necessarily whether or not we're getting good advice. And in this respect, it's a common sense point, but we have to think about how we assess the quality of the web materials themselves. And there is quite a lot of published material online about evaluating the quality of web materials. It's often about the editorial model, whether there is an expert editorial board or editor involved in assessing what's going on to the website. You can also use citation patterns and esteem indicators to make judgments about the relative authority of a particular thing that you found online in one context or another. So in summary, I've tried to highlight a number of features about online materials and some specific links that you might want to follow up. As mentioned, perhaps download the slides from the CSDP website to get the individual URLs rather than try and follow the webinar. A point is that there's loads and loads of useful things out there online, particularly related to statistical data, but also to other forms of data and research approach. A lot of these have their origins in academic research and teaching, but they're applicable out with the academic sector. They're just as relevant to people working in third sector organizations, for example. Quite a lot of the useful resources are specifically associated with software, but not necessarily. And quite often, a resource associated with a particular software is also generically more useful than just being about using that particular software. And the last point, the warning flag. The internet's a big place. There's lots of good stuff on it, lots of useful stuff about research methods, but there's also some tricky features about evaluating the quality of websites. We can't always be sure that everything published online is good advice. So we need to think about how we assess the quality and consistency of the data as well.
Okay, so a short tour of the internet there. Some suggestions about finding resources that are potentially helpful working with data, doing research with data. So in the last of the presentations that we've got lined up, it's actually the last of our webinar series, in fact. We're coming back to really what's the core topic that inspires the project that we're associated with, the Scottish Civil Society Data Partnership. The idea of connecting together academic researchers who've often got an interest in third sector activities or they've just got methodological expertise and interests, with data and research interests, people in third sector organizations. And very often we find the thing to try and get across is to communicate to people in third sector organizations that the academic research angle is potentially helpful, whether that's directly collaborating with an academic researcher, perhaps on something relevant, or resources that are associated with the academic research sector, training resources, and so forth. So in the last of the recording, Alasdair Rutherford from the CSDB project, he's going to reflect upon what academic research collaborations have to offer to research in the third sector. And this recording should, I think it's about 15 minutes long or so that it'll take to broadcast. So we'll just switch, we'll switch over to that one.
In this session, we're going to talk about what academic research collaborations have to offer third sector organizations. Working with data is an area where there are lots of opportunities to collaborate with academics and where collaboration can be really fruitful. Collaborations can bring together people who have data, people who want answers from data, and people who have the skills and experience to work with and analyze data. There's lots of benefits to collaboration, and particularly to collaboration between academics and third sector organizations. Collaboration can help to develop skills and capacity in working with data and conducting research and managing and analyzing data. It provides an opportunity to access expert advice. That can be accessing the expertise of academics or researchers who want to understand better a practice perspective. Funding opportunities often target a particular sector, research funding for academia or project funding for third sector organizations. But many funders encourage collaborations in producing bids, and there can be real advantages to working together to secure funding for a particular project. Bringing together different perspectives means that you reach a wider evidence base. There might be research that's relevant to you that you're not familiar with. The collaboration itself can produce new evidence that fills a gap and that helps inform the design of future services. Collaboration can help you to reach new audiences who might be interested in your work or in the evidence that can be generated from the data that you have. There's lots of different ways to collaborate and different levels of involvement. The graphic on the right suggests that there's a continuum from the researcher being independent from the organization that they're working with through to a really collaborative project where both researcher and practitioners, third sector organizations, are equal partners in a project. Different levels of involvement will suit different organizations and different projects in different ways. Really close collaborations can be more challenging to put together, but can reap real benefits in impact on policy and practice. A common model is somewhere in the middle, where researchers do the research design, analyze the data, and produce the findings, and it's the third sector organizations, the practitioners, who help disseminate the findings or inform the research questions. But increasingly, where you're working with your own data, then there can be opportunities for more equal collaboration, where third sector organizations are involved in actually working with and analyzing their own data, and there's a real exchange of skills and knowledge. So it's hard to describe a typical collaboration, as the different needs of organizations, researchers, and projects mean that you might come up with a different collaboration in a different setting. But by way of example, I'm going to describe one collaboration that I've been involved in on a research project that brought together academics, third sector organizations, a public sector organization, and a private sector organization. So this project was looking at modeling volunteering participation in Scotland by combining different data sets. And the first lesson of collaborative research, of course, is to include everybody's logo in the title slide. So here you can see the organizations that were involved in funding and carrying out the project. The collaboration involved a number of different partners and was funded by the Advanced Quantitative Methods Network, Acumen. The project had three components: some practical working with data and data linkage, some training for third sector practitioners, and some collaborative work in using and disseminating the research. The substantive research project itself was to analyse volunteering participation in Scotland and trying to capture data on both demand and supply factors. So that meant linking aggregate organisational data about charities and voluntary organisations in Scotland at different local geographies to individual survey data from the Scottish Household Survey. The partners in the project were drawn together because they held different data, they'd been involved in the collection of different data sets, or they had a particular interest in the findings and the dissemination. As part of the project, the partners collaborated in offering training to practitioners working in third sector organisations about how to work with data. And it used the data analysis that we were doing in the research as an example of the analysis in the training. The project itself produced a linked data set that linked Scottish Household Survey data with the Scottish Charity Register that is still being used for volunteering research now. It led to an academic working paper in collaboration with Volunteer Scotland, which was made available discussing some of the findings of the project. The training programme acted as a pilot for capacity building in quantitative methods with third sector organisations that helped support the development of the civil society data partnership that is now delivering these webinars and workshops. And the collaboration, although small to begin with, has led to further collaborations with the project partners on a number of different projects. One of the challenges with collaborations is knowing where to start. And in this case, I already had contact with all the project partners, although I hadn't necessarily worked with all of them. But having that existing relationship made it much easier to develop the project idea, to get buy-in from the partners, and to make sure that we came up with a project that met everybody's needs. Of course, there's quite a bit of work in advance in relationship building and developing these connections in order that you have the right group of organizations to put together a good project. There are lots of advantages to research collaboration, but I've highlighted 4 here that in my experience have been particularly valuable when working together. A really important advantage is access to expertise. Part of this is the subject knowledge and research methods knowledge of the academic partners in the project. But just as important is the policy and practice knowledge of the third sector partner. They provide a good understanding of what an interesting research question that's going to have impact is, and of what things are like on the ground, helping to keep a research project grounded in reality. Collaboration involves lots of sharing of resources, sharing work, sharing knowledge, sharing support. And different organizations have access to different resources. So a collaboration can bring them together and make it more than the sum of their parts. Some of those resources are intangible, like access to networks, connections to other people and other organizations, not just in the third sector, but to the general public, to volunteers, to service users. And bringing together people in different sectors can really open up those networks and create new opportunities. And lastly, an important advantage of collaboration is the disruptive bit, it's the inspiration, the having to do things differently that leads to new ideas and to innovation. Of course, working together isn't necessarily easy, particularly if you're coming from different backgrounds and different perspectives. So there are plenty of challenges in collaboration. One of the more immediate ones can be language. We all have our own jargon and acronyms, and we often take it for granted that everybody should understand what they mean. So it can be difficult to begin with to make sure that when you're using the same term, that you're actually talking about the same thing. Keeping a collaborative project going requires a lot of coordination. Different partners can face different pressures and commitments at different times, and it can take a bit to understand that. For example, academics are likely to be quite hard to get hold of in the middle of September as semester starts and students are back, and there's a big spike in teaching commitments. And thirdly, it's important to have good mechanisms for getting agreement and for making decisions and for dividing up responsibilities to ensure that the project runs smoothly. And people coming from different sectors might have different expectations and different ways of doing that. So I'm going to share 3 tips from my experience of working in third sector and academic research collaborations. First of all is flexibility. That for a collaboration to work, all the partners really need to be committed to working together, willing to muck in, share tasks, and to get the job done. Secondly, you need a bit of perspective to walk a mile in someone else's shoes. So it's important that everybody understands the priorities of each partner in the collaboration. And stronger relationships that are already in place and a good understanding can really help that. But it's important to have an explicit discussion of what each partner wants to get out of the research collaboration to make sure that it works for everybody. And thirdly, in order to be able to build these relationships and put collaborations together, it's important to get out and meet people. Networking can always seem a bit instrumental, and academics in particular aren't necessarily so good at networking outside of academia. But Scotland isn't that big, and so if you're going along to events, you do tend to meet the same sort of people, and building those connections and relationships between people and between organizations can lay a good foundation for future collaborations. So it's important to choose the right type of collaboration. And to some extent, that depends on what you're trying to do. Are you trying to generate evidence, or are you trying to use or share evidence that is already being produced or has already been produced? If you're trying to generate evidence, then real joint research projects or consultancy and training can lead to those sorts of outcomes. If you're wanting to make use of and share existing evidence, then dissemination activities, participation in groups and committees, or joining forums, networks, and communities of practice can be a good way to start building those relationships and to collaborate across sectors. There are other benefits to collaboration with academics specifically related to data and data analysis. Having a formal collaboration with a university can provide access to software that might be useful in analyzing data. So particularly the statistical software that we often use to work with large data sets can be quite expensive to purchase, but by participating in a collaboration, then you might be able to access resources like that. There's also likely to be opportunities for training whether formal in the form of workshops, webinars, or being able to sit in on a course that's running, or just informally through working together on doing some data analysis. So that could be in methods or in using software. Universities also have subscriptions and access through the library to a wide range of publications, which may be useful in getting to grips with your own data. And academics also have access to lots of data sets as well. There may be data that it makes sense to link to your data or to compare to your data. And so being able to get access to those data sets can be very valuable. And of course, more generally, through working together in a collaborative project, you might be able to get some advice that helps you think about how to store and process the data that you're collecting in the future in order to make it easier for you to do your own analysis with it when you need to. There is an increasing interest from funders and commissioners of research to encourage collaboration between different sectors for all sorts of advantages, as we've described in this session. This has resulted in quite a lot of advice and guidance and help being produced for those trying to form new collaborations and establish successful collaborative research projects. There are guides available on evidence for success, and also more specifically on collaborating with academics through the Evaluation Support Scotland website. And these guides are also linked to from our Think Data website. And I would encourage you to take a look at both of these if you're interested in making more use of evidence in your data, and in particular in collaborating with academics to do so. Collaboration between academics and third sector organisations is a key element of our Scottish Civil Society Data Partnership project. So if your organisation has data that you want to do more with, or if you're interested in finding out more about opportunities to collaborate or to discuss potential research projects, then please do get in touch with us, and you can find more information about that at www.thinkdata.org.uk. So hopefully that's given you some sense of some of the advantages and benefits of research collaboration, and also helped you to think about some of the challenges. When collaborations are based on good relationships and shared interests, then it can be a really productive way to share expertise and resources and engage in some really exciting research that's beneficial to all the partners involved.
Okay, great. So Alasdair was reflecting there on some of the potential benefits of collaborations between academics and researchers and third sector organisations, and also commenting on the actual process of collaboration and some of the ways, some advice on how to approach it effectively and productively. It is a good thing to finish off the webinar on, because it's a very important theme in attempts to develop research, exploiting data about the third sector. Obviously, academics, researchers in general are motivated to undertake research, and there are quite a lot of initiatives. It's not just the SCSDP project that we represent here in Stirling and St Andrews universities and SCVO, all based in Scotland, but there are other similar initiatives elsewhere in the UK as well, and internationally as well. People are academics engaging with third sector research and interested in taking things forward through that collaboration. So we hope you found our presentations this afternoon of a little bit of use. They're all united by the theme of research resources for undertaking research with third sector organisations, and we've also been trying to highlight features of collaborations and supporting other people or working with other people or supporting other people in the research process from a number of different perspectives. So this is actually the last of the webinars in the CSDP series. They remain online for some time to come through the thinkdata.org.uk website. There'll probably be some other things. Keep looking out on that website, because there'll probably be some other things in the pipeline in the future as well, whether it's further activities or recordings available. But for the moment, we'll wrap up at this point.